It was a typical Sunday in Charleston, South Carolina. The early afternoon heat made the sun's rays give a golden glow to the tree-lined streets as my mother, Evelyn, and I walked home from worship at our small neighborhood church. I, just 8 years old, wore my white shirt and tie, like every Sunday. Mum always said, "God deserves our best." Axton. She had an unshakable faith, and although I was still trying to understand what that meant, I trusted her. As I played with my butterfly keychain in the back seat, I felt the ease of routine. Everything seemed normal. Mum hummed a song from the church choir, a melody I hadn't been able to get out of my head since I first heard it. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. It was then that the sound of the siren broke that peace, first distant, then closer and closer. I looked out the window and saw an ambulance approaching at high speed. The car we were in stopped at the intersection, obeying the red light. Other drivers also braked, trying to understand where that rushing and deafening sound was coming from. However, something was wrong. Mom looked in the rearview mirror, her face tense. "Hold on tight, darling," she said, her voice calm, but with a worried look in her eyes that I'll never forget. Time seemed to slow down, and the ambulance, instead of following a straight line, lost control. She skidded, turned sharply to the right, and before we could react, came straight towards us. The impact was deafening. Everything happened too quickly to understand, but also slow enough for every detail to be etched in my memory. I felt the car being thrown sideways. My body pressed against the seatbelt, the sound of glass breaking and metal crunching. My head hit the back of the seat, and everything started spinning. The silence after the accident was worse than the noise. Mum was motionless in the front seat, her head lolling to the side. I called her, but there was no response. "Mommy!" My voice was weak, mixed with the sound of sirens that continued to echo in the distance. Soon I heard footsteps and screams. Paramedics arrived quickly. I felt someone touch my arm and heard a male voice say, "We have a child here. No pulse?" These words, even in the midst of confusion, hit me like thunder. I wanted to scream that I was there, that I could hear everything, but my body seemed distant, as if it no longer belonged to me. As they pulled me out of the wreckage, I saw one last scene. My mother, being taken unconscious from the front seat. After that, everything went dark. The darkness was total, but it wasn't scary. It seemed like a silent, almost welcoming void, until the sound of voices in the distance began to pierce that silence. The voices became louder and more frantic, and something tugged at my consciousness. "No pulse. Starting CPR." A firm and decisive voice echoed around me. I didn't know what it meant, but it seemed important. Something was pressing on my chest, as if I was trying to wake up a body that was no longer mine. I opened my eyes, but it wasn't like really opening my eyes. I saw everything from above, as if I were floating on the roof of the ambulance. I saw my small body lying motionless as two paramedics worked frantically. A woman with her hair tied up shouted, "Load of 200, let's try again." My heart stopped 3 times that day. The first was at the scene of the accident, the second when the ambulance was on the way to the hospital, and the third in the emergency room, where doctors gathered around me in a race against time. Each time I died, I seemed to be pulled out of my body, observing everything with a strange serenity. Inside the hospital, the emergency room was chaos. "We're going to lose him," shouted a desperate young doctor, as another held a defibrillator. A nurse placed her hand on his shoulder. "Not yet, not yet." On the other side of the room, my mother was unconscious, being treated on a separate stretcher. I didn't know she was fighting for her life, but I saw a thin line of energy connecting the two of us, like an invisible thread. Again, "Load of 300, shouted the doctor. The electric current shot through my body, and something pulled my consciousness down, but not enough to bring me back up. It was at that moment that I understood their despair. From above, I could see the tense and tired faces, but also the determination. "Come on, kid, you will not abandon us today," the doctor shouted. There were tears in his eyes, something that, even at that age, seemed so unusual for a medical professional. As they tried to revive me for the 3rd time, I felt a different presence in the room. It wasn't a person, but something warmer, brighter. It was as if light began to invade the space around me, not through the door or windows, but from inside each thing, filling the space with warmth and peace. And then, the line on the monitor indicating my death changed. First, a slight beep, then another, and another. "He's back," shouted the nurse. "Blood pressure rising. Normal pace." The medical team started to breathe a sigh of relief, but I still felt something different. My body was alive again, but my mind remained between two worlds, as if something or someone was about to show me what came next. As my body remained motionless on the hospital gurney, my consciousness moved away from it all. I felt pulled to a place where the weight of the world disappeared. The pain disappeared, and I was enveloped in a golden light so intense that I couldn't look directly at it, but at the same time, it was comforting. It was a living, pulsating light that radiated warmth and peace. It was as if every ray of her was whispering words I didn't understand, but which filled my heart with a deep serenity. All fear disappeared. There, time did not exist. I walked, or at least felt like I was moving toward the light. All around me, shapes appeared that looked human, but also weren't. They floated, shone, and conveyed something that enveloped me like a hug. They did not speak with words, but with direct communication to my heart. "You're safe, little one of them said, transmitting an energy so pure that tears would flow from my eyes if I still had a physical body. It was then that I saw the figure in the center of the light. He wasn't just part of that glow, he was its source. A tall figure, dressed in a white robe, and with a face that seemed to convey all the feelings in the world: love, kindness, wisdom. "You must be Axton," he said, his voice reverberating inside me. It was no ordinary sound, but something that seemed to resonate in every part of my being. Instinctively, I knew who it was. "Jesus?" I asked, not knowing where the courage to speak came from. He smiled, and that smile carried a strength that seemed to erase all the suffering I had felt up until that moment. "Yes, it's me, but you can't stay here yet. There is something important for you to do, to stay. But as everything here is so beautiful, I don't feel pain anymore. I don't want to go back." My voice sounded childish, but it carried the whole truth of what I felt at that moment. Jesus knelt in front of me, moving closer so our eyes met. "Axton, you have a purpose, and although I don't understand it now, his life will be a light to many." "You need to go back." I wanted to ask more, to understand what he meant, but I felt something pulling me back. It was as if that entire field of light began to dissolve. The surrounding figures looked at me tenderly. "You will never be alone, Axton," one of them said, as the light around me began to fade. When I opened my eyes again in the hospital, everything seemed colder, more confusing. The medical team celebrated, but for me it was like waking up from a dream I never wanted to leave. "Mommy," I murmured, my voice so weak it was barely heard. The nurse next to me smiled with tears in her eyes. "You're safe, darling. Your mother is being taken care of too." But inside I knew something much bigger had happened. The second time my consciousness left my body was different. I was not immediately greeted by the welcoming light. Instead, I felt like I was floating above my own body again, but this time I was pulled up, higher and faster. It was as if I was being taken beyond everything I knew to a distant place, where the world I knew had no limits anymore. Suddenly I stopped. I was suspended in space and looking at Earth from a perspective I never thought possible. The planet appeared bright, but not completely. A dark cloud, dense and oppressive, was spreading like a shadow, covering the lighter parts with something that seemed to devour the light. It was as if the planet itself was fighting this darkness. "This is the future, Axton," said a familiar voice. I looked around and there he was, Jesus. But this time his expression was serious, almost sad. "This darkness is not just physical. It represents the choices humanity is making. Hatred, selfishness, greed are drowning out the light that still exists." I felt a tightness in my chest. "But can't we do anything? Is there no way to stop it?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch conveyed something comforting, even given the gravity of what he was saying. "There is hope, but it will take a lot of love and compassion for this light to prevail. That's why you were chosen to see this." The vision began to change. I was taken closer to Earth, where I saw people walking in the streets, but their faces were obscured by the same dark cloud. It was as if they were blind, unable to perceive the darkness around them. I saw world leaders speaking in gilded palaces, promising things that sounded good but carried a deceptive energy. "In 2024, Jesus continued, a world leader will arise. He will appear to bring peace, but it will be a false peace. He will deceive many, leading people onto paths that will take them further away from the light. This will be a pivotal moment, Axton, a time when humanity will have to decide between following the truth or succumbing to darkness. But what can I do? I'm just a boy. I don't know how to help." Jesus knelt again, as he had done before. But this time his gaze was steadier. You are not alone, and you never will be. Your mission is not to change the world alone. Your mission is to share what you saw and talk about the love that conquers any darkness. Every small gesture, every word, can plant a seed of light. As he spoke, I saw scenes of people helping each other, smiles in the midst of pain, and acts of kindness breaking the shadow that enveloped the earth. It gave me hope, but it also made me feel the weight of responsibility. As the vision began to fade, I felt the same tug as before, as if my body was calling me back. The last thing I heard was the voice of Jesus. Trust in the light, Axton. Trust in love. When I opened my eyes again, a doctor's face appeared above me. He's stable, he announced with relief, but inside me, the words of Jesus echoed. I knew that what I had seen was not a dream, it was real, and my mission was just beginning. The third time my consciousness left my body was the most intense and emotional of all. I didn't know my life was hanging by a thread again. For the doctors, my body was fighting, but my soul was already elsewhere. This time there was no immediate light. I was thrown into a vast but dark space. All around me, voices echoed. They didn't speak words, but they conveyed feelings. Feelings so deep and so full of pain that I felt crushed. It was as if all the sadness, fear and despair in the world were dumped on me at the same time. Then I started seeing faces. Unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar faces. Men, women, even children. They looked at me with terrified expressions, as if they were lost in a place with no way out. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Yet I felt what they meant. Fear, regret, emptiness. Who are they? I asked aloud, my own voice shaking. They are those who have not yet found the light, a voice replied, and when I turned around, there was Jesus again. Your presence was the only thing that gave me strength in that place. They are suffering so much. Why am I here? I asked, feeling the tears flow even without having a physical body. Jesus came over and placed his hand on my shoulder, just as he had done before. You needed to feel this, Axton, to understand that love and light are more than words. They are choices. You were chosen to be a bridge between those who are lost and the light that still shines. He showed me more. I saw images of people around the world, some in big cities, others in small villages. I saw moments of kindness, a woman helping a stranger on the street, a child sharing his food, a man offering shelter to those who had nothing. These small actions seemed so insignificant, but each one created a glow, a spark that helped combat the darkness I had seen before. But why me? I asked, still trying to understand the weight of it all. Jesus looked straight into my eyes. Because you are pure, Axton. You have an innocent heart and a resilient spirit. People will listen to you not because of your strength, but because of your truth. You don't have to change the world alone. Just spread the message and trust in the power of love. Then he showed me something I will never forget. I saw my mother, still unconscious, but holding my hand in her unconscious state. It was as if she was keeping me connected to life, without even knowing it. She believes in you, Axton, and others will believe it too, but you need to go back. Suddenly, the light around us started to get brighter. I knew I was being taken back. Before everything disappeared, Jesus spoke once again. This is your mission, Axton. Trust in love, trust in light, and remember, you will never be alone. When I opened my eyes in the hospital again, I felt something different. My body was tired, but my heart was full of purpose. The doctor looked at me in disbelief. He came back, again I don't know how, but he came back. Beside me, my mother was awake. She held my hand tightly and with tears in her eyes whispered, "You are my miracle, my son." And at that moment, I knew my journey had just begun. Waking up in the hospital was like emerging from a deep, meaningful dream, but with the weight of a broken body. My chest hurt with every breath. My arms were immobilized by bandages, and my legs felt so fragile I could barely move them. It was hard to believe that I had survived the accident and 3 cardiac arrests. My mother was by my side, holding my hand as if she would never let go. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but they sparkled with a relief that I still couldn't fully understand. "You are here, my son," she said, her voice soft like a melody. I knew God had a plan for you. Although I was happy to see her, a part of me was still trapped in that other world. The memories of my near-death experiences were so vivid that it was impossible to ignore them. The messages of Jesus, the light, the faces full of suffering. All of this was recorded in my mind as if it had happened at that moment. The days that followed were a mix of physical challenges and emotional reflections. The doctors were in disbelief at my recovery. The fractures in my body were severe, but they seemed to be healing faster than expected. "The boy is a walking miracle," said Dr. Malcolm Hayes, the doctor who led my treatment. He was a serious man, but with a curious gleam in his eyes. He visited my room every day as if he wanted to understand what had happened. One afternoon, he pulled up a chair next to my bed. "Axton, do you remember anything while you were, well, technically dead?" I looked at my mother, who nodded, encouraging me to speak. Then I told him about the light, Jesus, and the messages I received. The doctor listened in silence, without interrupting. When I finished, he became thoughtful. "I'm not a religious man, Axton, but you got me thinking. 3 cardiac arrests. You shouldn't be here. Maybe you're right about having a mission." My mother was my greatest strength throughout the recovery process. Even though she faced her own pain, she had been seriously injured in the accident and lost my father. She never stopped supporting me. One day, while holding my hand, she asked, "Have you seen your father, dear? Do you think he's okay?" I remembered how I had seen him in the light, smiling next to Jesus. He looked so peaceful, so happy. "Yes, Mom, he's fine. He was with Jesus. He said he's proud of us." Tears ran down her face, but this time they were of comfort. "This means everything to me, Axton. Thank you for sharing this." As the weeks went by, I regained enough strength to start walking again. Each step was a small victory, but also a reminder of the miracle that had allowed me to live. As I faced physical pain and emotional difficulties, one thought guided me: the mission that Jesus had given me. I knew I needed to start sharing my story. I still didn't understand how or where to start, but something in my heart told me that I wasn't alone on this journey. When I was released from the hospital, life felt both familiar and unrecognizable. Our house, in a quiet neighborhood in Charleston, was still the same. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sounds of trees swaying in the wind, everything remained, but something inside me had changed. I carried a weight and clarity that I didn't even know how to explain to my mother. She knew something was different. During the first few weeks at home, I was introspective, sitting on the porch, looking up at the sky and remembering every moment I had experienced during my near-death experiences. Jesus' words echoed constantly: "Spread the light, trust in love." One night, Mom sat next to me. There was a cup of tea in his hands, but his gaze was fixed on me. "Axton, you are so quiet. I know something is happening inside you. Please share with me." It took him a moment to respond. My heart was racing, but I felt it was time. "Mommy, I need to tell you something. Something big." I spoke about the light, about the angels, and about the encounter with Jesus. I recounted every detail of the 3 near-death experiences, from the initial peace to the vision of the future and the mission he gave me. As I spoke, tears began to stream down her face. "Axton, did you see all of this?" I nodded. "And I know I need to do something. He asked me to tell the world, but I'm just a boy. Who will believe me?" She put her hand on my face and smiled. "You have a powerful message, my son. People may doubt, but those who need to hear will believe. Let's start with our church." The following Sunday, with my arm still in a cast and a recovering leg, my mother and I went to our little church. Pastor Elijah Boone was a kind and wise man, known for his patience and his ability to listen. After the service, my mother asked to speak to him privately. "Pastor," she began, holding my hand firmly, "Axton has something important to share. It's something I believe we all need to hear." The pastor looked at me, his eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Of course, kid, he can talk." I told my story for the first time in public. My voice shook at first, but as the words flowed, I felt a different strength. I told him about the accident, the cardiac arrests, and, finally, the visions. I talked about the light, Jesus, and the warning about 2024. When I finished, there was silence. The pastor stood, rubbing his chin. "Axton, your story is extraordinary. I know many may find this hard to believe, but I believe God works in mysterious ways. I will think of a way for you to share this with the congregation." The following Sunday, Pastor Boone called me to the front of the church. The small pulpit has never looked so intimidating, but when I started talking, I realized that people were listening. Some had tears in their eyes. Others seemed confused, perhaps skeptical. After the service, some people came up to me. "Thanks for sharing this, Axton," said an older woman. "Your words brought peace to my heart." But not everyone believed it. A younger man shook his head. Visions, encounters with Jesus? This sounds more like a child's imagination. His words hurt, but my mother was there to comfort me. Not everyone will believe it, dear, but you did what he asked, and that's what matters. This experience gave me the courage to continue. I knew there was much more to come, and that my mission had just begun. After my report at the church, things began to change quickly. My story, initially restricted to the small circle of our community, found an unexpected path to reach more people. One of the church members, inspired by what he heard, shared my experience in a social media group. Within days, people started commenting, sharing, and before we knew it, a local reporter showed up at our door. It was a sunny afternoon when the doorbell rang. My mother answered, and a young woman with short brown hair, holding a notepad, smiled at her. "Hello, Mrs. Winfield. My name is Jenna Carter. I'm a reporter for Charleston Daily. I heard about Axton's story and wanted to talk to you, if you're willing." My mother hesitated for a moment, but looked at me. "It's your decision, darling." I didn't know exactly what to think, but something inside me told me I should take advantage of the opportunity. "Okay, we can talk." Jenna was an attentive professional. She asked me a lot of questions, always writing down every word. "Axton, what was it like seeing Jesus? How did you feel during these experiences? And what exactly did he show about the future?" I told her everything again, in detail, while she listened attentively. In the end, though, I noticed there was a gleam of skepticism in his eyes. "You're very articulate for your age," she said, with a smile that didn't seem completely genuine. "But you understand that this might be hard to believe for some people, right?" I nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but I can't change what I've experienced. I can only tell you what I saw and what I felt. And I hope it touches those who need to hear it." The story was published the following week with the headline, "Boy Survives 3 Clinical Deaths and Shares Visions of the Afterlife." The impact was immediate. Some people were deeply touched, sending messages of support and gratitude. Others scoffed, calling me a liar or saying it was all my imagination. "Axton, look at this." My mother showed me an online comment from a woman in another state. She said, "I recently lost my daughter and felt hopeless. Axton's story brought a peace I hadn't felt in months. Thank you for sharing this." These messages strengthened me, but criticism also came. "Another story made up to gain attention," said one comment. It was painful to read those words, but my mother was always by my side. "Honey, remember what Jesus said. Your mission is not to convince everyone. It's about spreading the light, and those who need to find it will." My story kept spreading. I was invited to speak at other churches, and even on a local radio station. Every time I talked about my experience, I felt like I was accomplishing a little more of the mission I was given. Jenna, the reporter, came back to see me after the article. "Axton, I have received more responses about your story than any other article I have ever written. Some people even said you changed their lives. I think maybe there's something to that." She didn't directly admit that she believed me, but her tone was more respectful than in our first conversation. It showed me that even skeptics could be touched by the message of love I shared. Spreading the message was exhausting at times, but I knew I wasn't alone. Each person touched by the story, each message of gratitude, reminded me that the light Jesus showed me still shined, even in the darkest of places. As my story gained more attention, I began to realize something Jesus had taught me during my near-death experiences. True change wouldn't come from grand gestures, but from small acts of love that spread and touch lives. This idea stuck with me as I faced the challenges of sharing my message with an increasingly diverse audience. With every presentation at churches, community groups, or interviews, I emphasized one thing above all else. Love is the only force capable of overcoming darkness. It was not just an abstract idea, but something practical. Choosing love, I said, is not easy. Sometimes it means forgiving those who have hurt us. Other times, it means helping someone who can never repay us. But it's in those moments that the light grows, and that's how we change the world. One day, while visiting a school to talk to children about my experience, a girl named Emily raised her hand. She looked hesitant, but there was something in her eyes that made me stop and listen carefully. "Do you think love is enough to change the bad things that happen in the world?" Your question took me by surprise. I knew a lot of people thought the same, but hearing it from a child was different. I took a deep breath before responding. "I don't think love makes everything go away, Emily, but I think it gives us strength to face bad things and helps bring light to dark places. When we choose love, we are planting seeds, and those seeds can grow and change more things than we imagine. She nodded, and although she didn't say anything else, I could see that my words had meaning to her. As the message spread, I began to receive invitations to speak at larger events. Some people wanted to turn me into a phenomenon, a kind of miracle boy who could attract crowds. But my mother, always with her wise advice, warned me, "Remember, Axton, your mission is not about fame or recognition. It's about love and light. Don't get lost in what the world expects of you. Just do what Jesus asked you." I took her advice and focused on keeping my message simple. In a presentation at the largest church in our city, in front of hundreds of people, I decided to talk about something I had learned in my visions, the impact of small acts. In my experience, I have seen that darkness grows when we forget each other, but I've also seen how little things, a smile, a kind gesture, a supportive word, create sparks that can light up even the darkest places. Each of us has the power to spread that light. After the sermon, a man approached me. He was tall, with a serious expression, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't decipher. "My name is Marcus," he said, his voice hoarse. "I lost my wife 2 years ago, and since then I have felt that life has lost its meaning." Her story, it reminded me of how she always said that love is all that matters. I think I needed to hear that. His words moved me deeply. I knew at that moment that the work I was doing was truly fulfilling the mission I had been given. My message was clear. Love is the answer. No matter how strong the darkness seems, it can never overcome the light. Each time I shared this, I felt like the message of Jesus was spreading, and despite the challenges, I knew my mission was to continue. My journey to share the message of Jesus has become the central purpose of my life. At 25 years old, I looked back and saw the extraordinary path I had taken since that accident that changed everything. Every presentation, every conversation, every message exchanged with people who were touched by my story contributed to something bigger, a silent movement of love and hope. My name, which had previously been known only in the small neighborhood of Charleston, was now circulating throughout larger communities and even outside the United States. Spiritual groups, churches, and organizations invited me to share my story, but for me, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about touching lives, one at a time, and spreading the light the way Jesus had shown me. One of the most powerful experiences happened when I was invited to speak at a spiritual retreat in Asheville, North Carolina. The event brought together hundreds of people from different backgrounds, all looking for answers to their doubts and spiritual pain. On the last night of the retreat, while I was on stage in front of an attentive audience, I decided to end my talk in a simple but meaningful way. When Jesus showed me the earth covered in darkness, I felt afraid. I thought, how can a child change something so big? But he taught me that it's not about changing everything alone. It's about each of us choosing the love in our hearts. It's about planting seeds that will grow far beyond what we can see. As I spoke, I saw tears in several people's eyes. They were not of sadness, but of deep emotion, as if something in them had been touched. A woman named Sarah came to talk to me afterwards. She was a mother who had lost her son in a car accident. "Axton, your story gave me something I thought I would never have again. Hope. If he is with the light, as you described, then perhaps one day I can meet him again." I held her hands and said, "I believe he is, Sarah, and that he wants you to continue spreading the love you still carry for him." My story also began to impact people I would never have expected. Jenna Carter, the skeptical reporter who had written the first article about me, called me after months of no contact. "I don't know how to say this, Axton, but your story really resonated with me. I started reflecting on my own life and realized that I was so focused on proving you wrong that I ignored what really matters. I wanted to thank you. As the reach of my message grew, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about all the people who listened and chose to act. I saw communities organize events to help people in need. I saw families reconcile, and I heard stories of transformation that left me speechless. I also knew it wouldn't be perfect. There were still skeptics, critics, and even those who distorted my message, but that never bothered me. The faith that Jesus had planted in me during those near-death experiences was unshakable. Today, my story continues to be told, but it is no longer about me. She belongs to the world, to the people who found something in her to be inspired by. My legacy is not just an account of what happened to me, is a call for each person to choose love, even when it seems difficult or insignificant. Jesus showed me that the light always wins, and that's what I take with me every day of my life.